Welcome, Guardian. I am Ray, and I am here to help guide you back to the light. For years and years, I continued to tell myself that weed was not a problem for me, until the day came in which I came to the terrifying realization of how it was affecting my life. You see, the one great demon that I call the monster mind needs your permission to enter your life. Like a vampire that needs you to welcome it into your house before it can enter and start stealing your life energy. God does not allow the demon to just have free reign over us, but it gives it the free will to tempt us. And so too, God gives us the free will to accept or to deny the temptation. One way this demon tempts us is by instilling Stockholm Syndrome within us. This is when we begin fighting for and justifying all the reasons to continue engaging in the behavior that is fundamentally destroying us. Weed is such a tricky substance because there are so many clear benefits to it. I was always my most creative on it, and I also would always have the best workouts while being high. But there was always a lingering issue that I had, and that is, no matter how great the benefits were, I would always experience like 20 to 30 minutes of goodness, and then hours and hours of just this kind of dull haziness. And I remember I would keep telling myself, this is taking me away from being able to truly enjoy the present moment. Because too, I would always get absorbed in my own mind, and the thoughts would go crazy. And I definitely didn't have the ability to focus. But these things were not the worst of it. One day, I had went over to my friend's house who I knew was fueling this habit. We would often smoke and have conversations together and play music. He had his own problems that he was dealing with, and he used weed to help him with that. During our time together, he would often vent about the problems that he was experiencing in his life, and he could go on for hours. This time, he brought up a situation that he was having some issues with some people at his work. Although normally I would be on his side in this kind of situation, I realized how negative his thoughts and attitudes toward the situation was. Continuously complaining about the problem and all the revenge he could take, but never actually doing anything about the problem. Never taking accountability or responsibility for the way that he created it. You see, he had a tendency of playing the victim and always blaming others for the way his life was going. We smoked and continued to hang out, but what would happen later on that night would be the last straw for me that would lead me to cutting him off from my life. What I discovered was the same pattern that would repeat itself over and over and over again. For years, this was on the edge of my consciousness, of my awareness. Something in me knew that I needed to stop smoking. It was only then that I realized what was happening. Every time I smoked weed, my willpower would get zapped. At some point, the desire to eat would arise, and I would just binge eat a bunch of food, as you may know if you have ever smoked weed. Binge eating would further drain my willpower, which would ultimately lead to the true issue, which was an addiction to corn. My desire for corn on the cob was unprecedented. I would sneak out late into the wee hours of the night and go into the cornfields and binge until the sun would rise. Farmers would be at awe in the decimation of their crops. And this night, I had my worst relapse of all. What I realized that throughout the years, I was absorbing all of his negative energy. And because cannabis dissolves boundaries energy can be exchanged much more easily. That is why he would always feel better after we would hang out, and I would often feel worse. I spent years trying to improve my life, but I would continue to self-sabotage and never be able to reach past a certain point. This same demonic force fed off both my friend and I, and kept us a slave to our suffering. And my weakness that allowed the demon in was smoking weed. Weed was the only substance that I ever actually had difficulty in quitting, because it's so easy to rationalize its use. Sometimes the things that are so obviously bad are not actually as bad as the things that don't seem as bad. For instance, you gotta be kind of messed up to go and try meth. But if you smoke weed, you're probably just a normal person. The same goes for smoking cigarettes, for instance, because cigarettes are such an easy thing to implement into your life, and you're not forced to experience the negative side effects for long periods of time. When my willpower was at its lowest, I watched the demon attack me at my most weakest and vulnerable points. Every time without fail, weed would lead to greater vices, like laziness, like overeating, like lustful desires. Whatever proclaimed benefits was always overshadowed by the suffering and the pain it caused. But it was only until I became aware of the suffering was I able to attach it to the true root of the problem. If I would have remained oblivious and unconscious, I would have never realized that weed was the problem, or at least a great problem. And the moment I realized that my friend was uninterested in changing, that was the moment that I cut him off from my life. Even when I would smoke without another person's negativity around, I would always be led to the same result. When I cut the only person off fueling my addiction, I was able to quit. And within 6 months of cutting him off and quitting weed, I was able to quit all of my addictions. I am at the best that I've ever been, and I continue to grow each and every day. Now think about how hard of a decision it is to cut off somebody you've been friends with for over a decade. Somebody who you know is a good person, but are deeply troubled. Like it's been said, until you heal the wounds that somebody else created, you will bleed all over people who had nothing to do with them. But sometimes, for the sake of the greater good, you have to make the tough decisions. You have to sacrifice the things that are killing you. The demon can only hurt you when you allow it in. So pay attention and find the things that lead you to a downward spiral. Because hell is taken one step at a time. It's always one thing that leads to another, that snowballs into a whole big mess. I should mention, however, the problem with weed is not the weed. It's the dopamine that you get from smoking it. I would not get the same addictive effects from eating edibles. It's specifically smoking it that makes it addictive. When your dopamine receptors get fried, you lose willpower. And when you lose willpower, you are more susceptible to engaging in vices. So you can see how smoking weed leads to laziness, leads to binge eating, leads to scrolling on social media, dopamine after dopamine after dopamine. Then you get triggered by a lustful picture. Now you have no willpower to say no. And in this kind of hazy state, you're just kind of going with the flow. You can see how this spirals out of control. Like a vampire, the great demon is forced to steal energy from you. So whenever you feed it, it grows stronger and you grow weaker. And as this balance becomes shifted, not in your favor, that is when the demonic can possess you and you have to surrender to its power, the power that you gave it. It uses your own power, your own energy against you to control your life. But the good news is that You are always in control because it is your power. It does not force you to give it away. It manipulates you into giving it away freely. So you become free from demonic possession by taking away its fuel source. That is your energy. Don't feed the negative thoughts. Don't feed negativity, your fear, your shame, your guilt, any other negative emotion. The more power you keep, the less power it has over you. And over time, you become strong enough to overcome all of your addictions. You start retaining your energy one piece at a time. You go from the smallest addiction to the largest. Because if you imagine, every source of energy leakage is like its own mini demon. So your greatest demon might be alcohol addiction. But until you deal with the lesser addictions, like smoking nicotine, or smoking weed, or scrolling through social media, or even things like not getting enough sleep or not exercising, until you gain enough power, you cannot overcome the demon. And until you overcome all the smaller demons, you cannot overcome the great one. But so long as you continue to allow your energy to be stolen from you, the demon will be great and you will be weak. Don't allow the seed of sin to sprout within you. Step by step, remove each vice, cut out each root. Remember, it is not you that is sinning, but it is the sin living in you. It possesses you and takes control, and that is why you feel helpless to these addictions. And this demon feeds on the tree of sin that we water with our own free will. It is not the demon that you must fight. It is only that you stop feeding it. It feeds off the fruit of the tree of sin that grows within us. So cut out the roots. Stop watering this tree. And soon you will find freedom within yourself. And it will not matter what external circumstances arise. You will be able to resist the temptation because you will have reclaimed your power. Remember, it's not the water outside of the ship that sinks it, but the water that gets in.